welcome to episode 11 of the Football Conversations podcast. I'm delighted tonight to be joined by John Hurd, the founder of the NUFC Fans Against Sportswashing protest and pressure group, who was set up in direct opposition to the Saudi ownership model at Newcastle United FC. John, a huge thank you for joining me and welcome aboard.
Hi, nice to meet you. Yeah.
So, John, this is a bit of a complex issue, so let's just begin with the basics. What exactly is sports washing?
Sports washing is when a state or an entity, but mostly states, buy a sporting entity, mostly football clubs, but in the case of the Saudi regime, using boxing, esports, everything, to basically deflect attention away from their crimes. Um, Other people would say as well, it could be termed like using sport as soft power, to get a hearing, but also it has like for us in our experience of like years of campaigning with this and Newcastle United fans against sports washing, we see that it has an internal element to it as well. It's to convince the Saudi young people, especially who are football mad, say, despite all the executions and the misogyny and the homophobia and transphobia, say, look, we're at the top table. We've got a Premier League team, so that it has sort of different elements to it, but basically that's what it is. The Saudi state are happy when Yasser Al Rumayyan is on Wembley turf with a Sam Fender special shirt, actually, holding the cup aloft. I'd rather people were thinking about that than executing 25 Egyptians, which they're threatening to do in the next few days.
Well, I'm hoping to come on to exactly what goes on in Saudi Arabia later on, but when exactly did the Saudi state interest in Newcastle first come to your attention? And at what point did you decide to kind of take action against it?
Okay, well, the story goes back to sort of 2020, 2021. There's a figure called Amanda Stavely, who's basically a well, she's actually from England, but she's a Middle
Mhm.
Eastern businesswoman, like a fixer.
Yes.
And she previously tried to sell Liverpool. She actually said she was a lifelong Liverpool fan. She had a Liverpool shirt, but she soon changed that when she got interested. But basically, through an intermediary, actually an Instagram influencer, was I think there's a colleague of Stavely. She arranged a meeting with Yasser Al Rumayyan, who's a Saudi minister, but he's the head of Aramco. And also, he's got a lot of posts there, but he's the chairman of Newcastle. And they arranged a meeting on a yacht with Mohammed bin Salman. And basically, she put a pitch and convinced them to buy. It didn't happen straight away. What happened was Newcastle were owned by, as you know, Mike Ashley,
Yep.
who had a very bad reputation, had a lot of money, but he didn't really invest it in Newcastle. We were up and down like the Assyrian Empire,
Yes.
getting relegated, then back up again. And he tried to use the club in a cynical way for his company,
Hmm.
Sports Direct, and he got a lot of flack for that. A lot of fans as well, linked the exploitation of the workers in his company who are on 0 hour contracts with the mismanagement of the club. There was even banners paid for by unions at a few matches saying Sports Direct shame. And
Yeah.
so basically, Stavely got this bid together with the Reuben brothers as well, who are sort of like, well, very rich Tory businessmen
Hmm.
and property developers, and they are minority shareholders, but the PIF was going to get 80%. Now, what happened in Newcastle was people were quite excited that someone was coming in to buy, but it was blocked. It was blocked by the Premier League. And not over human rights issues, even though that was raised at the time. Amnesty said, you shouldn't be selling a club to the Saudi state. But it was blocked because the shenanigans over the football rights, because Qatar, which owns uh, the Champions League winners, PSG, they were broadcasting Premier League games. It was a massive deal,
Yeah.
millions of pounds in that. And basically the Saudis, because they had a dispute which almost went to the brink of war, actually.
Hmm.
They had a dispute with Qatar. They were like streaming them for free, stealing it. And that was one of the reasons why it was blocked. Now, what happened in Newcastle was politicians who you would think would be against the bloody Saudi regime taking over Newcastle started calling for transparency, and they're
Yeah.
saying, and some figures, and we don't really know who was behind it, but somebody sort of financed the petition. And unbelievably, they got 100,000 signatures on a petition saying that the government, etc., should, be transparent, or the Premier League, the government should force the Premier League to be transparent about what was happening. But really,
Yeah.
what it served to do was to get support for the Saudi takeover. And this, I
Yeah.
think, a lot of fan groups, I'm not blaming the normal
Hmm.
fans, but I think fan groups, politicians, fanzines who participate in that, really they should be ashamed of themselves because that basically facilitated the takeover in 2021. And what happened was I think the sort of the Saudi state agreed to stop streaming. They did a deal with Qatar. It stopped streaming for free, and they gave the famous phrase that they gave was legal and binding assurances that the PIF was not the Saudi state, and that's never been we've never seen it. Nobody's ever seen it. It's a legal document,
Hmm.
or what, or perhaps it was even just words, but it's never been. We always ask the Premier League to publish it because it's blatantly it was a lie, because
Yeah.
Yasser Al Rumayyan is a minister in the government. Seven members of the PIF, the Public Investment Fund, basically are ministers. So how can it not be the government, And the chairman of the PIF is Mohammed Bonso, the guy who ordered the execution and dismemberment of Yamal Khashoggi. So, this I remember at the beginning, a lot of fans would say, "Oh, well, it's like Manchester City," which is not.
Hmm.
It's not the state, it's the PIF. Now, nobody, not even the fan who really supports the Saudis having the ownership, they wouldn't argue that the
Yeah.
PIF is not the state. It is. Everybody
The,
knows it.
they've lost that excuse, if it ever even existed. The next point, actually, John, was that just on the subject of supporters there, a sad indictment, really, of the modern game, but a lot of supporters would put forward the argument that the only way to compete, the only way to break into the elite and to win shiny trophies and sign fancy, expensive players is to have a state ownership or a hedge fund or some horrible group owning your club. Um, what is the alternative to this? Is there an alternative to it, or what would you suggest in opposition to this? Because this seems to be very much public opinion, unfortunately, at the minute.
Well, I think what there needs to be is more openness and debate and discussion amongst the fans. And I think also the fan groups, the official ones, are not doing their job. I think the bottom line for us is that states, and there's only two, well, there's two states in the UK. It's Abu Dhabi owns
Hmm.
Manchester City, and Saudi state owns Newcastle. There's only two out of the Premier League, and
Yeah.
then there's PSG owned by Qatar. Now, apart from the political implications, I mentioned previously there could have been a war between Qatar. Imagine if there was a war again
Yeah.
between those, it's a very unstable part of the world. So the bottom line is states. Also, from the point of view of competition, we're football fans, and
Yeah.
the bottom line for football fans is that you have to have it's a cliche, but a level playing field. If you don't have
Yeah.
a level playing field, it ceases to be a sport. So obviously, a lot of Newcastle fans will say, "Oh, why can't we spend more money?" Well, that's, is it really fair? Also, it could kill football as well
Yeah.
because the estate is not even like one of these hedge funds that you've said. No, they're bad
Yeah.
enough, but
Yeah.
the estate has bottomless pockets and it could distort completely the game. So in our campaign, we've been contacted by fans of other clubs, and I would think if you had a referendum amongst Premier League fans of Premier League clubs, and you ask them, do you think states should be allowed to own football clubs? I think most of them would say no. Also, there's things that people don't realize. For example, if I asked you who's the most successful or any football, the most successful team in the history of European or world football, you'd have to say it's Real Madrid,
Yes.
unfortunately. Yeah. Now, Real Madrid are not owned by a massive company or
No.
into, a hedge fund or a state. It's actually they vote for the president. It's
Yeah.
a complicated thing, but it's basically a fan los socios. The socios
Hmm.
they own the club. Barcelona's the same. Athletic as well. Osasuna. There's clubs like that. Now, what we would support, we've been contacted by German fans and um, Scandinavian fans who are really afraid that if this continues, then their model will not be able to compete. But for example, 50% plus one, the Bundesliga model, it's not perfect, but it's a step forward. It would bring us back to a much fairer competition. German football is very successful. The national
Yeah.
team, they do a good job. They've won a lot more World Cups than England, or
Yeah.
Scotland, And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
but the point is, it's based on a much more equitable, equal sort of playing field. So this idea that there's no alternative to states like Saudi Arabia, Abu Dhabi, and Qatar owning football clubs, we don't accept it. It's not true.
And there's also the fact that there's obviously a lot of talk in England about the independent regulator. And I don't know if you remember a few years ago, I can't remember if it was UEFA or FIFA had said that if this passes, the England national team could be at risk of sanction because it would count as political interference in the national game. So how come that's not allowed, but uh, a political interference from another part of the world is allowed to interfere basically with Newcastle, Manchester City, or Paris Saint-Germain? Is it simply a case that money wins everything?
Well, I totally agree. It's a massive contradiction, but we have a problem, don't we? We have a problem. UEFA, okay, we can criticize UEFA, but it's not as bad as FIFA.
Yes.
They're putting on this farce of a World Club competition. They can't sell any tickets. And it's
Hmm.
like, as far as I can see, Infantino is in the pocket of MBS, Mohammed bin Salman. And basically, they're going to, if they carry on like this, they're going to kill the goose that lays the golden egg. They make enough money anyway. Why do they want even more? They should be investing in the grassroots game. But the thing about about what's happening at the the level of competitions are becoming devalued because
Yes.
it's like they just haven't. Portugal won this nation. What was it? The nations.
Yes. The Nations League.
Most people are saying, "Well, what the hell's that like?"
Yeah.
What is
Yeah.
it? What is it? So I don't know if that answers your question. Is it? What was?
No, yeah, no,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think it's part of a wider debate on never in my life have I met so many people so unanimous in the view that due to kind of money, commercialism, state ownership, that the game is really gone, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, we have a lot of we've got guys in our campaign, but
Hmm.
also like the feedback we get, from other people in Newcastle. I'm a bit older. A lot of guys my age just say, brought up in the 80s,
Yeah.
anti-Thatcher and all that. They just say that's it. Like, I'm finished. We get people donating to the campaign, but a
Yeah.
lot of people, you still carry Newcastle in your heart. But I've got
Yeah.
one of the guys who writes for the campaign. He now fully committed to non-league football.
Yeah.
And it says like the spirit's there again. It's some football fans' way of handling it,
Yeah.
about what's going on. But we always have the attitude. We always say, look, we were Newcastle fans long before Saudi state took over, and we'll be fans after they've been kicked out as well. So
Yeah.
for us, it's a long game.
What sort of reaction have you had from your fellow supporters, John? Have you has support for you increased in the kind of 4 years? What do you kind of face on a daily basis from your own
It's
fans?
it's up and down, isn't it? So like at first, we would say that the majority of fans were just happy that Ashley was out,
Hmm.
and so people were dancing in the street and
Yes.
having a great time. And there was a very small minority who, I think they made a big mistake, wearing the thobe and wearing
Hmm.
sort of Saudi gear, which the club said they shouldn't do and all that. But it's been a battle. But I would say the majority of fans, because they were let down by the politicians, and I think particularly fanzines and fan groups who didn't put it on the table what this meant, the consequences of it, then most fans will say, well, what can we do? But we would say like there's a third, a third, a third. I think there's like most people in the middle, if you talk to them, they'd say, look, you're right about the human rights, but what about Man
Yeah.
City? But then there's a section who have been taken on board. Like, for example, when we first
Yeah.
started, we did a protest outside. It was supposed to be a silent protest outside the Chelsea match, and it was like the fixture after the Saudi after bin Salman had ordered the execution beheading of
Yeah.
81 people, just like that, just to say we can do it. Anyway, we went and we had like pictures of young guys who are on death row. We've contacted a lot of Saudi, groups that we work with, Saudi exile groups, obviously.
Yep.
And we thought it was hard. It was a bit of a gamble. We got loads of threats. People say,
Hmm.
if you come, we're going to beat you up and all that. But it was all like social media talk. We thought
Yeah.
the majority of fans will be okay. But then it was investigated by some journalists, and they actually said that there's a troll farm in Riyadh. It's called the Center for Against Terrorism, yeah, which is really funny. And basically they're just like mad dogs, like. And the problem for us, and it made us like more determined. Like we would mention, for example, we'd mention Manahal Al Tabi. She's a fitness
Hmm.
instructor, a young girl. She's just had her 30th birthday. She was like following the liberalization policies supposedly of bin Salman. So she did a video with her doing her training, not wearing a abaya or the rest of the clothes, and she was arrested, tortured, abused, had her leg broken, and everything. We put that on social media, and we had some fans saying she's a terrorist. And
Yeah.
say we're not going to let that lie. We kind of that.
No.
Now, I would say that most fans would say, yeah, you're right. That's terrible. It's awful. But what can we do?
Yeah.
Saudis who we work with say to us, look, even just saying their name, even just putting a hashtag or like raising a poster of it in a match, which we tried to do against Sheffield United, because they were owned by Saudis, a Saudi
Yeah.
prince as well, then even that has a little bit of an effect. I think the biggest effect that we had was when they've played some Saudi internationals,
Hmm.
and we brought across Lina Arathul, whose sister again had the same treatment as Manahal Al Tabi. She was the leader. Lohan uh, is Lina's sister. She was
Hmm.
arrested, kidnapped actually from another country and taken back. But she was the leader of the right woman to drive. And even though
Yes.
the campaign, she was imprisoned, and Lina was luckily outside the country. She came to Newcastle, and I remember she said the day that we had the day before we had the Saudi um, the Saudi internationals. She said, what price is your silence? We tried
Yeah.
to get her to meet councillors and MPs. You know how many turned up? We wrote to all of them. Three. Yeah.
Three.
And one MP said they will only speak to the to us if they were, I don't even know if it was a man or a woman, if it was like in secret. We couldn't publicize their name. So that shows you the way the politicians have acted. They have like official policies, in favor of human rights, against modern day slavery, etc. But when we ask them, well, will you raise the cases of, Salma al-Shabaab, or who was, a mother who was actually in Leeds, who was
Hmm.
dental, doing a master in dental surgery, and she was arrested when she visited her kids for putting, against the system of male guardianship. So, all these cases, if you
Yeah.
talk to people, they say, oh, yeah, we agree. But when you ask them to do something positive, they say, basically, let's say the bottom line is, a lot of people think that if the Saudi owners hear that a lot of fans are complaining about the human rights, then they'd leave, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But we
It's
have to raise this issue.
Yes, that's true. Actually, just when you mentioned that kind of boat farm thing in Riyadh, do you personally, obviously you're out there and you're campaigning all the time, Do you feel any, given their reputation, do you feel any intimidation or threat by them, or not?
It's more like reputational, you know. It's like the got the when it was the worst. Now they just try to ignore it, you know. But
Yes.
you know, it depends. It depends. It depends what's happening, you know, in the country. But for example, in 2022 when we're getting, you know, a lot of publicity and all that,
Hmm.
there were like, you know, there were threats, you know, to say we're
Yeah.
going to get you when you come to this thing, but it's just all talk. But it was, for example, it was an interesting example at that same protest we had at the Saudi internationals. It showed the limit of what they can do because the
Yeah.
Saudis expected loads of Newcastle fans to go to the match, and Newcastle fans just weren't interested. And I
Yeah.
think personally, I think it was because fans were saying, "Look, you know, they're the owners, but we don't have to support Saudi Arabia." So they were very poorly attended. But there was like it shows you, you know, how it works. But there was like a hit squad of these what you call them, these YouTubers. So there was a young
Yeah.
guy called well, yeah, doesn't matter. He's called Andrew. Yeah, I think he's called, and he's made like a career out of, like,
Hmm.
you know, doing YouTube videos about Newcastle. He came to the meeting. He did an interview with Lena, which was fantastic because he
Yeah.
obviously took you a Saudi exile, a young woman who's like very brave. It's really hard to, you know, to attack her, you know, and he couldn't, you know, it was
Yeah.
brilliant. It was a brilliant interview. Went up on YouTube and loads of people said, "Oh, that's really good." And, you know, it's good to hear a Saudi speak about human rights and that. The next day it was taken down.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, he then came to the protest and he had like a posse of young guys with Saudi shirts on, and they started harassing me, like, you know. And we were getting interviewed by Italian TV, BBC, and I said, "Look, I'm not talking again. I've already talked to you. After you did your YouTube and all that." But they got really angry, and they got this older gentleman who we didn't know. He just came along, and he was like arguing with them and giving them arguments about what, you know, about the campaign. And this video, they were trying to provoke him, like, you know. This video went up on YouTube. He replaced it with, oh, this one, like an attack video. We exposed Newcastle United fans against Sportswashing. It was really funny. But anyway, loads of ordinary fans said this is embarrassing. You're
Yeah.
showing Newcastle fans in a bad light. So this gives us a bit of confidence to show, like, most ordinary fans are okay. You know, the same guy. This is the thing. It caused a little scandal when Newcastle won the Carabao Cup. This is quite funny. Loads of the YouTubers were like speaking, celebrating. They said, "Why don't you continue the celebrations in the Boulevard in Riyadh?" And they were doing adverts for. So obviously, money is being exchanged, I
Yeah.
think, you
Yeah.
know. So yeah, and look, you know, you can see it as well. For example, True Faith, which is one of the main fanzines, we got
Hmm.
articles at the start, but now, you know, they won't like touch us. But
Yeah.
you know, they admitted in a book by James Montague, just been published recently. He did interviews with us and with True Faith, the podcast, I think it is,
Hmm.
said that they're making six-figure amounts now. So obviously, in the orbit of the, you know, Saudi state, people are
They've been bought.
getting something from it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say, like, you know, you know, you're being bribed or anything like that, but
Yeah.
obviously, like, the success, people think they can make something from it, like, you know.
Yeah.
And that's so it's like, you know, the American writer Upton Sinclair said, you know, when a man's career depends on the salaries he's receiving, it's hard to get him to see another point of view, like, you know. So
Yeah.
that's the way it works, like, you know.
That's true. So what are then, John, are the main arguments you face from Newcastle supporters who are in favour of this? Because from my own experience, you know, it's the Wild West on Twitter or X or whatever.
Oh
But
yeah,
I,
yeah,
I used to be a subscriber to The Athletic, and obviously you got to pay for that. And the comments section on that is, you know, it's apparently supposed to be a bit more moderated, a bit more sensible. And I used to, just out of interest, go onto the Newcastle section anytime something like this
yeah.
appeared, and you'd have guys um, putting forward really big constructive arguments in favour of Saudi. And I just used to wonder, is this what football support has come to, that you have to apologise for something like this? What kind of things have you faced? What arguments have they put forward to you, and how can you dispel these arguments?
Well, there's different narratives, isn't there, that get sort of become like fashionable. You know, the first one was um, Manchester City do it, so why not us?
Hmm.
Well, the answer to that is no state should own a football club.
Yeah.
The second one was the PIF is not the Saudi state. As you said before, no one argues that now. It is.
Hmm.
Then they say that there's some people who would even deny what was going on in Saudi Arabia. There's
Yeah.
some of the politicians said it also, there's a one of the MPs said that who spoke up against Saudi Arabia pre-takeover. She said that maybe engagement with Saudi Arabia will, with the good people of Newcastle and our democratic institutions and support for human rights, will start to change the regime. And I remember talking to some Saudis about that, and they said they're joking, aren't they? It's the opposite. It'll be the tail wagging the dog. It'll be the opposite that'll happen, and that's what's happened. But I think we've already mentioned,
Hmm.
about alternative ownership models. We got involved with because of the international fans getting in touch with us. We got involved with a campaign called Reclaim the Game, which is
Yep.
basically set up to against the Saudi World Cup
Yes.
in 2034. And the guys we've been in touch who are involved in the anti-Qatar World Cup one,
Hmm.
basically they explained to us, they said that that was just a complete farce, that all the promises that they made, about human rights, respect for, gay rights, also the work, and obviously the question of workers dying, they've got slave labor conditions in these
Yeah.
countries. In Saudi Arabia, it'll be worse. So what we had a little debate with them, and they were saying, look, we think that we should have a campaign where we just say boycott the 2034 campaign. And so we've got 9 years, but we are very happy to get involved with that because I think that the way FIFA is going, some people, even like legislators in football, were saying that FIFA is not fit for purpose. Now it's
No.
just like it's just a way, an instrument to make Infantino into a billionaire. And he's hobnobbing most of the time.
Yeah.
There's the famous picture of him sitting in the middle, Putin on one side and Mohammed bin Salman on the other. For the World Cup in Russia, Russia invaded a sovereign country. In Qatar, with the conditions for people in Qatar, and well, the World Cup in the United States is another question. I wonder if that'll even happen. What's going on in the United States? And then Saudi Arabia in 2034. It's,
Yeah.
a lot of people in football, not just us, not just the
Mhm.
fans, but a lot of people are waking up to the way it's going.
Yes. No, I would absolutely agree. Just with Newcastle again, have you managed to have any kind of dialogue with the club, with anyone at the club? What about some of the highly influential Newcastle greats? What about likes of Alan Shearer, someone like that? Have you managed to get through to anyone like that? Eddie
No,
Howe, anyone?
we often raise that, for example, Eddie Howe, um, he was approached. There was a letter sent to him by the brother of a guy who was being deported from Morocco, I think. Yeah,
Hmm.
who was like in sort of danger of being, if he went back, of being executed. And this guy appealed directly to Eddie Howe. We delivered the letter to the club, but they didn't answer. But it was reported in the press. But one of the things this young guy said, he said, "Look, you might think that you can't make a difference, but just one word, one
Yeah.
phrase supporting my brother would help." Now, Eddie Howe's an interesting case, isn't he? Because right at the beginning, he was asked all the time about the Saudi regime. Yeah.
Yes.
And he said, "Oh, I read the Guardian, the Times," and he said, "I haven't got enough knowledge. I'm a football manager, but I'll try and read up." 3, 4 years later, he still hasn't got enough knowledge. Recently, he was given the freedom of the city of Newcastle. And, we,
Hmm.
we raised that directly with the council and said, look, good, give him the freedom of the city. But what about freedom for Manahal Al Tabi? What about
Yeah.
freedom for Saudi women? Now, about influence, the club usually say no comment on these things,
Yeah.
usually, right? But we've made headway with the council. So there's like a few councillors now who are uneasy. We've got like
Hmm.
a ex-Labour councillor, I think a couple of Liberal Democrats, and the Greens as well are coming on board, but also unions as well. I'll explain about that later. It's a very interesting development with that. But basically, we got the council because the new council leader earlier in the year, Karen Kilgore, and we got her to agree to meet a Saudi human rights delegation. So there was Lina Al Athul, there was like people from her organization, there was the sister of Manahal Al Tabi who lives in Scotland, is in
Hmm.
exile. and other representatives. And they put like 8 points to the council. And, they're really good points saying things like, can you raise these specific cases with Yasser Al Rumayyan? After all, he's the chairman of Newcastle, is a
Yes.
minister in the Saudi government, and he has to, and also you should have an audit of the council because Newcastle City Council has a policy against modern day slavery. Now, the sleeve sponsor of Newcastle United is known, which has
Mhm.
there's a report by Equitim, which is a Gulf-based labor rights campaign. Basically, they've exposed them of using in Saudi Arabia um, um, modern day slavery. It's horrendous. Now the thing
Yeah.
is, we've contacted the unions about that, and a lot of unions are worried about it. But anyway, we're at that meeting. Shows you how it goes. The other points they made was saying that if the club, if the Saudi state through the club tries to take advantage of the relationship with Newcastle, that we should like the council should like put up a photo of some of the Saudi prisons of conscience. They should consider renaming a street.
Yeah.
In favor of Saudi democracy, all of it. A lot of good points. At the end of the meeting, they asked the councillor, would you have a photo taken with us?
Hmm.
And she refused. Now, the thing is, she's got loads of photos with Eddie Howe and the players and all
Yes.
that. We found out later, we were looking at the claims. Council leader, MPs
Hmm.
were given free tickets to the final, yeah, and also to the victory parade, which I don't know what they wanted free tickets at. And there's pictures of one of the MPs in front of the cup and all that sort of stuff.
I've
So,
seen this. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And you think about it, they're saying on the one hand, yeah, we do support human rights, and then they're taking freebies from the. You have to look at it. You have to look at it. But the thing is, the Saudi Human Rights Organization one of them that we work with, they said it was good to go and it was fantastic. They got a lot of,
Yeah.
it was in the public spotlight, but it was a tick box exercise for the council,
Yeah.
just to say we've met Saudi human rights activists. That was it. You know, and we're pushing them. We're pushing them again. For example, something's happened at the moment. Sam Fender
Hmm.
is playing three concerts tomorrow, Saturday, and Sunday. Now he's been doing statements in his concerts in support of Palestine and Gaza. Okay,
Hmm.
so
Yeah.
we've tried to contact him. It's hard to contact a big star like that.
Yes.
We made the point of look, it's fantastic, and we're totally in agreement. But what about the victims of the club? The owners of the
Yes.
club. Now, thing is, Yasser Al Rumayyan, as I said before, in Wembley had a Sam Fender themed strip on. There's a special one. I think what's called People Are Listening.
Okay.
So yeah, and so that's a Saudi minister with a Sam
Yeah.
Fender shirt on. Now,
Yeah.
now the thing is, I'm sure Sam does support people who are suffering in Saudi Arabia. But why doesn't he say something at the concert? You know?
Yes. Is it just too awkward for these people? Is it just
I don't
too?
know. We'd like to find out, we want to know because really, if he's supporting Palestinian people, he should be supporting the people in Saudi Arabia who are having, the horrendous suffering
Yes.
that they're under, especially the women and the young men. So it would have a massive effect if he said something. So we're trying. That's the kind of thing that we do. We're trying, we've written an article, we're going to publish it, and we're trying to get in touch with them and say, look,
Yeah.
can you do something? But the thing is, it's the money that it's like
Yeah.
an old Durham punk group, Penetration had a song, Money Talks. Listen, can't you hear it? And you can hear it quite loud. But we're not like pessimistic about it because
Yeah.
people are moved by human rights abuses, and in
Yes.
the end, they're good people. But we've got to find a way. You asked before about what are the arguments? People say, I think it's like I would say it's something like worshipping of the accomplished fact. If you know what I
Hmm.
mean, it means like, well, this is the way it is.
Yes.
I support human rights, but what can we do? In a way, I find that quite cynical.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot they can do. And the ones who should have known better, the ones I've mentioned before, they didn't do what they were supposed to be doing. And also, we've seen another thing, which is, I think is quite, we have to address, that like the very, very sort of young fans, they're obviously motivated by what's going on in the world. You can see what's happening, in Gaza and Palestine, and you'll probably be on the demonstrations and all that. But they're not making the link,
Yeah.
with Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
Recently, there's just been a development which is sort of confirmation of our sort of perspective. Because a lot of fans say now, is, oh, well, it's going to be easy. We've won a cup. We're going to be like Manchester City. We would say, hold on. It's a very unstable part of the world. Yeah. But
Yes.
also, think about this. I mentioned before the internal thing. Why do you think that Mohammed bin Salman, Yasser al-Rumayyan, the ministers, why are they jailing so many young women? Why are they on death row, young men? Some of these young men are on death row for going to a demonstration, not for
Yeah.
killing anyone. Some,
No.
like really, or one guy who we've publicized, been on death row, which is a terrible thing. But there were crimes committed when they were children, yeah.
Yes.
And what the crime was that they attended the funeral of an uncle who was condemned by the state. And then they arrested them, and then they have to let them go because the Saudi state has signed an agreement that they won't execute minors. So
Yeah.
what they do is they play cat and mouse with them. It's really terrible things.
Mm.
But they when they get to 18, they arrest them again. And
Yeah.
these are the guys. There's 9 guys. I think nine or 10 of them. What a situation. And it's under international law, it's illegal
Yeah.
to execute minors, but they get around it like that. So those are the kind of things that I don't think most football fans would support. But this is
Yeah.
what's happening. This is what they're doing.
What sort of journey has this campaign taken you on, John? Like, you must have met some quite inspirational people along the way.
Definitely, definitely. I tell you a story. One of the people who came to I think it was Lena who actually came to it. We said, "No, we'll take you to the hotel," and she goes, "Oh, I can go myself." And I said, "No, no, we'll take you because we feel responsible." And
Yeah.
I was just like asking her, I said, "How do you feel like a dictatorship?" He said, "What happened to Khashoggi and all that?" And she said, "Look, John," he said, if they were going to kill us, I wouldn't even know. You just,
Yeah.
it would just happen. She says, "But don't worry, they won't kill Wade Newcastle because it would be bad publicity."
Yeah.
And you're thinking, "Blood, that is really that someone lives with that." And no, also being exiled from a family, and there's not just
Yes.
her, there's loads of them, loads of Saudi exiles, and they're under pressure. But the thing
Yeah.
is, it inspires you as well. All we are asking is like to say, the Saudi state, which owns our club, are human rights abusers, and to protest against that. Also, I don't think it's just a question of like the future of football, about the way football's going, how we can reclaim the game. It's also to make a difference. Is
Yes.
they always say the Saudi activists who we talk to, if you did even the like minimum, like from a famous person, Fender, or a politician or a council leader, if they said something, it would get back to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Like what this woman who I've mentioned, her sister was saved because they went to the European Parliament and they demanded that the European Parliament say something. Because once the name gets out there, right at the beginning, I'll tell you this story. We
Hmm.
were talking to a guy, well, I call him Mustafa, and he
Hmm.
told us this story that he said he was amazed that there was Newcastle fans who wanted to do this campaign. And he said, "Look, I used to be a Newcastle fan." He said, "I loved Alan Shearer, like all of us."
Yeah.
And he said when he saw people celebrating that the Saudis had taken over,
Yeah.
he said his heart just sank. And he said, "I thought that Newcastle, Britain or England, was like a democratic country. I understand how you would be
Yeah.
celebrating this." He says, "Well, why is it?" So we explained to him that it was because of Mike Ashley and that. But he made like a statement. He goes, "Look, if you start with this campaign," and it was like these 9 young guys who were on death row. This is right back in 2021. He says, "You can't just do it once. You got to do it again and again and
Yeah.
again." And that sort of stuck with us when we had the meeting because he said, don't, because we were asking him, should we use names?
Hmm.
Because there's a process that they have. And he said, in general, yeah, we have to use the names. This is because think about it. If they're executed and they die and nobody knows the name,
Yes.
it's terrible. The
Yeah.
only thing that they've got is that people outside of the kingdom or trying to get them free or trying to stop the execution. So that's why it might seem like, a routine thing to do. That's why there's petitions,
Yeah.
mentioning the names, the hashtags and all that sort of stuff, holding up a photo outside the ground or inside the ground. That's why it's important,
Yeah. It gives them visibility and it puts
Yeah.
on pressure. And
Yeah.
well, when I think about the other state-owned club in England, John, Manchester City's owners, they've been around for nearly 20 years, not far off it. Roman Abramovich was here for just about 20 years. What's to stop the Saudis being here for 40 years? Because MBS is only 39 and he's the crown prince. He's in line
Well,
to, you
yeah,
know.
but
w-
perhaps I
w-
sort of finished the point that I was making. 'Cause I went off
oh,
on
sorry, sorry.
no, no, no. About that. That's the answer to your question.
Hmm.
So one of the points that we make to our fans is they hold on. This idea that it's going to be forever. It's very unstable. So the really the Saudi royal family have stolen all their wealth. One of the things that come up at our meeting once was it was a journalist said, well, it's their money they can spend on what they want, and the Saudi said, hold on a bit. He says, with their money, they've
Yeah,
stolen it from us. No one asked the Saudi people if they wanted to spend 500 million on a northeastern football club. They
yeah,
want they want uh, infrastructure. They don't want big palaces. They want a health service and all that. Anyway, it's unstable. So they're afraid of the young people. It's possible you could get like a revolution in
yeah,
Saudi Arabia. And do you think like a democratic Saudi Arabia would be spending all that money on vanity projects? It's not just Newcastle, on the golf and the wrestling, everything.
yes.
It's
They've
obviously
been,
for their own prestige. But nothing's just happened recently. We've written about it. There's the masked freedom fighters. So these again, very like you said, what have I learned? Very brave young people who they go on social media in a
Mhm.
mask. And the points that they're making, they're saying that the wealth of the country is being wasted on
Yeah,
sports washing,
yeah,
that they've got no freedom, and that the royal family are dictators, and they're executing. So the thing is, for the Saudi Arabia, it's like all or nothing because it's very there's no trade unions are illegal.
hmm,
Uh, Parties are illegal. Political parties. There's no freedom of expression. You're arrested for a tweet. So the people who raise their heads and
yeah,
campaign, they're very, very brave people because even a tweet could get you a death sentence. So
yeah,
what I've learned from that is that these people are incredible, and we've got to keep supporting them. But it also shows as well that things could change very quickly. It could all
yeah,
come tumbling down, you
yeah,
know, especially the state of the Middle East at the minute,
yeah.
you
No,
know,
I agree.
the things that we're learning, like for example, you wouldn't think of this, right? But
Yeah,
for example, the policy of the Americans, Trump, and previous to the genocide in Gaza, was to get Saudi Arabia to do a deal with Israel.
yes,
So why isn't there any Arab country, and especially Saudi Arabia, going to do a deal with Israel now? The reason is because they're afraid of their own populations. You imagine how we feel
yeah,
in Europe, how we feel in Britain about what's going on in Gaza. Imagine
yeah,
what it's like in Saudi Arabia when people see
yes,
what's going on. So these people, this
yeah,
who are using the same spying on their own citizens that the Israelis do as well. In fact,
yeah.
the Israelis sold this. I don't know if you know this the spyware called Pegasus. Have you heard of it? It's quite.
I don't know. No.
Well, Pegasus is one of the most sophisticated spywares, and it's a company, private company, but financed by the Israelis. And it's basically they just have to send something to your phone, and they can read everything. And
Yeah.
it's how they used it with Khashoggi. There's been
Hmm.
loads of instances, but the Saudis use that with
Yeah.
from Israel. So at the top, they've got no problems.
Yeah.
Working with the Israelis, but obviously they're afraid of their own population.
Yeah.
For a lot of reasons.
So, John, what does the future look like for NUFC fans against sports washing? What kind of events are in the pipeline? What plans do you guys have for the future?
Well, we're going to continue. like exposing the double standards, like I mentioned with Sam Fender and
Hmm.
the council. We'll try to host new events in Newcastle. We'll choose like some matches. We'll probably have like a another protest highlighting whatever the Saudi human rights activists say cases that we should make. We work quite closely with them, and we'll raise those. We're thinking of having a campaign as well around the women's team,
Hmm.
because the plan to have a women's World Cup in Saudi Arabia as well.
I
But
mean, that's just a total insult. That that's just.
madness, isn't it? Like when they had the I think it was last year's Supercopa, the
Hmm.
Spanish Super Cup, yeah.
Oh yeah, the final
Uh,
they had.
yeah, the teams, I'm forgetting what the other team was, but the team that played Real Madrid, when they lost, their the women, the fans, and the wives and daughters of the players were molested, sexually molested at the game, and it's terrible, absolutely terrible, And the thing is, they're saying it's prepared for, for the World Cup,
Yeah.
So we'll be involved with that, um, you know, basically writing stuff and holding meetings. And I think also we want to you know raise the questions of like what fan groups should be doing. Like one of the things we've raised is about the Football Supporters Association, which you would think would be have a clear position against
Yeah.
state ownership, but they're very hazy on it. And
Yeah.
so we've been pushing for them to say, well, it's to us, it seems pretty obvious that you shouldn't have states owning clubs. That we had a meeting with from Fair Game, I think it's called. We were saying the bill that's going through. There's some positive aspects to it, but I'm sure that I'm not very confident in the Labour Party that they would put that in.
Yeah.
And it's very, in a way, it's disgusting because they talk
Yeah.
about the financial viability. They've got a lot of money, the Premier League,
Yeah.
At least they could do would not allow, human rights abusing states to own football clubs. It's not as if there's not other entities who would come in and give them money.
Yeah.
Sometimes fans say to us, "Oh, what's your end game?" Well, we're totally honest. Yeah, the end game is to get the Saudi state out of Newcastle because
Yeah.
it's a stain. Historically, it'll be a stain because it's, as I've explained, it's affected politics. It's affecting the culture. It's when you get into bed with the devil, it's a compromise. It's a big compromise. So it's not just about football, it's
Yes.
affected the newspapers as well. I remember a Saudi activist said to us, he said, how much, like I said before, he said, how cheap is it to buy your silence? If you're silent now, he said, they won't stop. He said, what are you going to do when Mohammed bin Salman starts buying newspapers,
Yeah.
television stations? Once they start, they'll not stop.
No.
So, as I've explained, they've managed to influence. Like the thing is that we find it a bit distasteful, but most of the sports journalists, apart from the local journalists, they've played a terrible role. It's just
Yeah.
all about the rumors, who they're going to buy. What there
Yes.
was actually an instance when the local paper, the Evening Chronicle, said His Excellency
Yes.
Yasser Al Rumayyan. We caused a big stink. And a lot of fans say, this is ridiculous. But there's a bubble in Newcastle. It's
Yeah.
very famous, called the Newcastle bubble. And once, if you have to get outside of it to see how others see you.
Yeah.
And like loads of Newcastle fans were outraged when Crystal Palace fans had that banner, but the banner was correct.
Yes, it was
That
correct.
they
Yeah.
held up was totally correct. Like you know, yeah.
These things they're just too awkward for people to handle.
You're trying to square a circle, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, John, your kind of events and campaigns, are these exclusive to Newcastle fans or can other people get involved? Do you have any kind of wider plans for the kind of wider health of the game and how people can get
Yeah,
involved in it?
no, we sort of like, we worked with, an alliance with groups, but I think, like I said, that one of the things we're getting involved in is is the international aspect, with
Hmm.
reclaim the game. I've tried to like reach out, for example, to Celtic fans,
Hmm.
their support for Palestine and saying, because Newcastle are going to play Celtic, and we're saying,
Okay. Oh
could
yes,
you
and yep. Yep.
hold up some banners of of Saudi prisoners of conscience at the match,
Yep.
but we haven't heard anything back yet. But those are the kind of things that we do because you find like we got in touch with Sheffield United fans and they were great, and they were saying,
Yes.
yeah, it's not exactly the same, but we agree with you. And so we had an article in their fanzine and all that. But like I say, it's football's at the crossroads, isn't it? It's like
It is.
which way is it going to go? Yeah.
Well, John, where can people find you?
Okay, well, you've got the website, which is NUFC Fans Against Sportswashing .com. Yeah. And then we've got probably the best way is on the Twitter account, which is No Saudi Toon. Toon, which obviously in Geordie means town. Okay, we
Yeah.
call the town the Toon, and No Saudi Toon. So it's very very simple. And if you go on there, there's all links. There's links to the website, and we've got like Instagram. But the main thing, what we use Blue Sky as well, and
Okay.
you can see a link to that. It's the same No Saudi Toon.
Yep.
But yeah, probably the best ways where most of the action is like through Twitter.
Yeah. Well, John, it's a horrible subject, but I've really enjoyed discussing it with you, and I just want
Yeah.
to say thank you so much for your time, and keep fighting the good fight, and I wish you every success.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Yeah.
Cheers, John. Thank you very much.